Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for your patience. We've had a couple of technical problems, and now we're here to talk to you about China. This is the first webinar that we've given at Teach Anywhere about teaching in China, and I'm really grateful that you're here to join us. My name's Lisa Clark. I'm an international recruitment consultant with Teach Anywhere, and my specialism is teaching in the Far East. So what we're going to do this evening is I'm going to talk about the various locations in China, have a little bit of a chat about benefits and salaries there, show you some job opportunities that we're currently recruiting for, and then at the end we'll give you an opportunity to ask any questions that you might have as well. So if you've been thinking about teaching overseas, the first question you might have is why China? And from my point of view, a year ago I would have said that's a very good question. 12 months ago I didn't have any interest in going to China. It was a place that I thought was very foreign, very far away, and very different, and I wasn't quite sure why people would consider it as an option. However, in November we went to, as a company, Teach Anywhere, went to China as part of our annual conference, and I came back with a very different perspective, to the point that I'm now planning to go there for pleasure at the end of the year and looking forward to having a holiday there with my partner. So having had the experience of China, I now perceive it very differently. So we're going to talk about China as a different cultural experience, as something that's very different to Europe or North America. We'll talk to you about how it can be really beneficial for your career. We've got some fantastic schools in China. Students are very attentive, very ambitious, very focused on their academic career. So you can really focus on what you enjoy doing, which is teaching. You're not likely to have to deal with many behavioral issues or disciplinary issues. You're just going to be able to commit yourself to your teaching career. And just to remind you that if you have any questions as we go along, you can type them into the chat box at the bottom of the screen. So please do so if you think of them as we go along. Okay, so just talking about some locations in China. It's a huge country, so you're going to get just about every climate you can think of there. And there's also lots of different cultures. It's hard to say Chinese culture because there's so many different provinces and so many different regions, and it varies so much. But starting with Beijing, that's a very popular location and somewhere that has some familiar sights for you, especially since the Olympics were held there and we had so many opportunities to look at it on our televisions. So Beijing's the capital city. There's a lot going on there. It's very popular for expats. There's some fantastic international schools, both British curriculum and some American and international baccalaureate curriculum. And there's a lot of things to do culturally. It's the home of Tiananmen Square and the Forbidden City, so you're never really short of things to do. It's a city the size of Belgium, which I think gives you some perspective of how much there actually is to see there. So, and you see that it's in a location that tends to be a little bit colder, being a little bit further north, but they still do have quite a lot of sunshine. And when we were there in November, I was surprised that I was able to wear just a light jacket during the day, even though winter was approaching. Moving on to Shanghai, another very familiar city, a little bit more glitzy than Beijing. Again, a very thriving expat community, lots of restaurants, lots of Western things to do there. So although it has a culture of its own, it's a little bit more familiar to Europeans and North Americans. It's got a little bit more of a Western flavor. Very good schools in Shanghai, again making it a very good career move for you. And lots of expats, so lots of opportunities to make friends. Somewhere you might not be so familiar with is Suzhou. This is a city that is known as the Venice of the Far East. It's very pretty, very picturesque, built around waterways. It's quiet, probably really well suited to families and couples, or someone who might be traveling with a friend. So if there were a couple of you who were going together to teach, this would be an ideal location. Suzhou is only an hour away from Shanghai by fast train. The bullet train will get you there actually in about half an hour. So from door to door, it's about an hour altogether. So perfectly weekendable if you wanted to have a quiet week and then somewhere a little bit more glamorous or somewhere with a bit more of an active nightlife for the weekend. Shanghai is just almost, not quite, but almost on your doorstep. We're working with some great schools in Suzhou, some great partner schools of better British schools that you'd be familiar with in the UK. Okay, we've already moved to Guangzhou. Guangzhou is a little bit further south. It has a subtropical climate, nice warm summers, warmer winters than you'd expect in China. It's very close to Hong Kong, so about an hour door-to-door on the bullet train. Very weekendable. A colleague of ours actually visited Guangzhou after our conference last year, and she said that it's very green and leafy, much more so than she expected. Perfect for families. Hong Kong, very easy to get to for the weekend, so if you wanted to have, again, similar to Suzhou, a quiet week but with a busier, more social weekend, then this is a good opportunity for you. We work with some very lovely family-friendly schools in Guangzhou. That makes it a very good option for people with children, particularly teaching couples who might have children that wanted to get a really high quality education. And there's more to China that you might think. So just including some places that are not so familiar, but you might have heard of Xi'an. It's the very famous place where the terracotta warriors were discovered, and you can go and see them. They're displayed just outside of Xi'an and all in pristine condition. We work with some lovely schools in Xi'an and have some nice opportunities there for teachers. Harbin is a colder location. In fact, it's a very cold location, and it's the home to the world-famous ice sculptures, which are kind of a small city of sculptures, life-size buildings made entirely out of ice, not very functional, but very beautiful and really worth a look. And then, of course, Chengdu. Chengdu is fantastic for two reasons. First of all, it's where the giant panda sanctuary is and where their breeding programs are taking place, which for Westerners particularly, these are very exotic animals and not creatures that we would expect to see during our lifetime. But also there are more international schools opening in Chengdu at the moment than you would expect. We're finding that we've got new client schools coming on board this year that we haven't worked with before. And there are lots of opportunities there for both primary and secondary school teachers. So what can you expect from the school that you work for in China? Well, you can expect that they will provide you with a work visa and that they will talk you through the process of acquiring that. So it can be, it can be a little bit complicated when you're going to work in a new country, and they'll direct you and guide you through the process of acquiring a visa. They'll provide you with flights at the beginning and at the end of your contract. There's sometimes an annual visit flight, in the middle of the contract as well, so that you can come home and visit your family. You would expect to be given accommodation or an accommodation allowance. The accommodation that you're given would usually be furnished, and it would usually be single. I haven't known anybody to be provided with shared accommodation in the Far East, although that's quite common in the Middle East. Transport from your accommodation is often provided along with meals at the school. The schools often pay your utilities so that you don't have any bills. You would expect a 2 to 3 year contract in the Far East. There are some schools that offer a 1 year contract, but that's very unusual. 2 years is common and 3 years is occasionally what's offered. And taxes vary in China. It's usually an average of around 10%, and some of the schools that we work for do pay this tax bill for you. What can you expect to earn in China? It's a very good question, and it's very hard to translate the actual money that you earn into real pounds or dollars compared with what you would earn in your home country. So we've done this cost of living comparison just to give you kind of an idea. When you receive an offer of employment in China, it will almost never look like an offer of employment you would expect to receive in the UK or in North America. It would always look lower, and that's why it's really important to think about what your money means in real terms when you're actually living in China. So if We say an average salary in London is £2,500 a month. You would expect to pay from that about £665 in tax, perhaps £500 in rent, which I think is extremely modest. If anybody in London is paying £500 in rent, I'd like to know where they live. About £75 a month in council tax, and perhaps £50 a month in utilities, which would leave you with around £1,210 a month to live on and to use for your leisure pursuits. In China, you might be looking at around £1,800 a month. Perhaps you would pay £180 tax, assuming that that's 10% and that the school isn't providing that as a benefit. You wouldn't pay anything in rent, you wouldn't be paying any council tax, you often won't pay any utilities, and that would leave you in Beijing with around £1,620 or the equivalent of that in your pocket each month. So we can adjust that for the cost of living in Shanghai, which is lower than Beijing, so that would make it around £2,200, or if you're in Guangzhou where the cost of living is around 63% lower than the cost of living in London, that would amount to the equivalent of £2,600 in Guangzhou. These figures came from the Expatistan website, which you're free to have a look at yourself. It's a really useful resource for teachers who are looking to work overseas. Okay, so what are the typical requirements of a school in China? Usually a school will expect you to be a qualified or certified teacher. You'll be required to have an undergraduate degree or a PGCE. Your undergraduate degree might be a Bachelor of Education, but it might be in your teaching subject, and you might have an MEd for primary or secondary teaching. You would need to have, now this says a minimum of 2 years post-qualifying experience. However, there has recently been a change by the Ministry of Education in China, and you would now be required to have 3 years of post-qualifying teaching experience. This has nothing to do with us at Teach Anywhere or with our schools. These are requirements of the Ministry of Education, and it's actually a requirement for you to get a visa to teach in that country. You need to have recent whole school teaching experience in what you were trained to teach. So if you are a secondary geography teacher, we wouldn't be likely to place you as a primary teacher, for example. And your experience should be solid and in a small number of schools. They want to see that you're a reliable, solid teacher. You need to have good references and, of course, an appropriate criminal record check. Now again, this is a restriction from the Ministry of Education in some countries. There are upper age limits, and China is one of these countries. The government won't allow you to work in China after the age of 60, and for that reason schools would expect you to be no older than 58 at the time that you apply for jobs with them. Another requirement is that you would need to speak English with perfect fluency. Now, I hope you've got a paper and pen because you might want to write down some of these numbers. I've just put up a selection of jobs that we have available in China at the moment, and this is just a small selection. We do have some alternatives as well. First of all, for primary jobs in Beijing and Suzhou, we have job number 9811 and 9833, which you can find on the vacancies page of our Teach Anywhere website. In Dongguan, we have 9850, 9851, 9852, and 9853. Now, this is in southern China and very near to Hong Kong, so that's quite almost commutable, definitely weekendable. In Chengdu, we've got an ESL post 9753 and another primary job 9481. So we've got secondary jobs in Chengdu in physics, biology, English and maths, and in Guangzhou in history, maths and science. And we do have many more vacancies in China which you can find on our website, www.teachanywhere.com. If you'd rather, you can get in touch with your Teach Anywhere consultant if you already are registered with us, or if you're not, please get in touch with me, Lisa Clark. It's now time for some questions and answers. So I have a few that have come in during the course of this webinar, and I'll go through those first. So the first question is, will I be able to save money? And I think that this question is asked quite a lot because the cost of the salaries in China are considered to be considerably lower than those in the Middle East. And as we've just seen by looking at the cost of living comparison, that is something of a myth. You know, the salary does look lower on paper, but when you see what you can actually do with it, you'll be able to see that you can save a considerable amount of money if you live smartly, particularly if you live if you eat in local restaurants or shop in local shops. You'll be able to save a great deal of money, at least as much as you would be able to in the Middle East, where the cost of living is considerably higher to match the salaries. Another question is, will I get Christmas holidays? Well, that depends on the school that you work in and the curriculum that they're operating. A lot of the schools that we work with are teaching the British curriculum, and in those schools it would be expected that you would have the Christmas holidays. Now, whether or not you can go home for Christmas is a different matter, because it depends on whether the school is providing a mid-year flight for you, or whether you're prepared to provide yourself with a flight to go back to your home country. If not, remember, you will be in a school where there are other expats, and there will be people who will be happy to spend Christmas with you. And by the time Christmas comes around, you will have, I imagine, formed quite a community within your school. Another question is, what is public transport like in China? We managed to take the underground when we were in Beijing. It was extremely clean, extremely reliable, and the cost of a journey was about the equivalent of 20 pence. So I would say the public transport in China is excellent, and especially compared to London, extremely affordable. What feedback do teachers typically give about China? Well, the feedback that we have about China is often that the schools are very, very academic, that the students and the parents are very focused on the students' success, and that teaching is a pleasure. Of course, there's feedback of different kinds from different schools. So I have a teacher who I placed last year in a more local school, and she absolutely adores her children because they're all local Chinese children, and they're all extremely well behaved, and they're really absolutely adore her because she's the only English person that they've ever met, or the only white European person that they've ever met. So I also have placed an African American teacher in Nanhai in China, and she often is stopped in the street and people take photographs of her because they've never seen anybody who looks like her before. So I think a lot of the feedback we get is that China is culturally very different, but you're the one who's different when you're there. So for that reason, you might be the subject of scrutiny sometimes. But the teaching experiences are typically very, very good, partly because the schools are so academic and there is such a focus on success. Another question that I have here is English widely spoken? And I think that generally the answer to that is no. There are some places, such as the international markets, where you can go and shop and haggle and get good prices for Western-looking goods, and people there know the right kind of English to do a good job in parting you from your money. But you wouldn't expect a Chinese person in the street to be able to give you directions or anything like that typically. I think that English is being taught more widely in schools, and the schools that we are recruiting to are teaching in a bilingual medium, so it's going to be more common in the future. But you should always remember that you're a guest in this country, and it wouldn't be wise to expect people to speak English all the time. And my next question is an interesting one. So this is, are there many jobs in Hong Kong? And the answer to that is generally we don't have a lot of vacancies in Hong Kong. And I think that the reason for that is it's a very popular location. People tend to go to Hong Kong and stay there rather than going for a couple of years and then going back to their home country. It's somewhere that people seem to emigrate to, which means not many vacancies come up. So remember that we do recruit to some areas from which Hong Kong is very easily reached for the weekends, and it might be worth considering those locations if Hong Kong has a particular appeal for you. Okay, and another question from someone who has read about a referral fee for recommending teachers and wants to know more about that. So we do have a recommend a friend system that will give you £50 if you recommend to us a friend of yours who's a qualified teacher who isn't already registered on our system and who we successfully helped to find a job overseas. Next question is, can I take my family with me? In some circumstances, yes, you can. If you register with us, one of the first questions that we will ask you during your registration interview is about your family. We'll want to know who you're married to and what your spouse does, so we want to know if they're a teacher. If you're a teaching couple, that's fantastic. We're always happy to register teaching couples, and the schools we work with in China are always delighted to have teaching couples on their staff. Often schools will provide tuition and sponsorship for your children as well. It does vary from school to school, and this is why it's important that we have this information as early in the registration process as possible so that we can match you to schools that are a good match, not just for you but also for your family. So another one here about the climate in China. What's the weather like in China? That's like asking what's the weather like in England. It's hard to know. China's an enormous country and there's a different climate in just about every province. So China can be extremely cold. There are provinces that have almost no summer, and then there are provinces that are extremely warm and tropical and have a very mild winter. So if the weather's a concern for you, you shouldn't rule out China, but you should look at a map and talk to your consultant about which areas are more likely to be pleasurable for you to live in if you have some concerns about the weather. My next question is, do the schools in China have good teaching resources, and should I take resources? The schools that we work with in China are among the better resourced schools in the world. We work with schools that have phenomenal resources and schools that are smaller but that are still very adequately resourced. It shouldn't be necessary for you to take teaching resources with you, but this is something which I would discuss with the principal or head of department at the school that you're recruited to after you've signed your contract or during the process of being offered a job. This is a strange question. Is there an age limit to riding bicycles? I think that although the Chinese government does place some age restrictions upon the age of teachers in China, they allow just about anybody to ride a bicycle from the moment that they can walk until the moment that they actually can't walk anymore. And just one more question. If it doesn't work out, can I leave before completing my contract? And the answer to that is, in all international schools, it's considered extremely unprofessional to leave a job before the end of a contract. And it's looked upon very unfavorably in your next role if you have broken contract previously. Of course, there are some circumstances in which it can't be helped. For example, I know of a teacher who had to take medical leave during the last trimester of a pregnancy and was not able to complete a contract. But that's a very unusual circumstance and not something that would happen every day. And she did leave her contract with on very good terms with the school. She negotiated an end that suited both her and the school, and she didn't just leave. Oh, I think we have one more. Okay, so I think it's, does the communist past have a noticeable impact on daily life for expats? Does the communist government have a noticeable impact on daily life for expats? I don't think it does particularly. While I was there, it was obvious that there was quite a large police and military presence on the streets, but while we were in China, it was also during the time of the new government being inaugurated, and it was unusual circumstances. It still didn't feel like an imposition or a threat. It felt very relaxed. And so I would say generally for Westerners, it doesn't have any impact. just as in any country, you'd be expected to be polite and to have respect for the culture and for the traditions of the country that you are a guest in. And this last question is, are you given help to learn Chinese? I think that some schools are happy to help you to learn Chinese or to help you find a tutor. But it seems that there's no difficulty in finding someone to teach Chinese to you. There are, if you look online, you can see there are lots of Chinese tutors who will teach you in small groups or one-to-one in the larger cities of China. And there are bilingual people who will do that, so you're not trying to communicate with someone whose only language is Chinese. I would recommend that before you go to China, as we did when we were visitors, you make an effort to learn a few of the basics, such as hello and thank you, so that you can at least be polite and show that you are making an effort, which I think is, whenever you're a guest in someone else's country, I think that that's the main thing that they want. So I think that that's the end of our questions. So I'd like to thank you for joining us this evening. Thank you for taking the time to listen to our presentation about teaching in China. Remember, if you have any further questions, please get in touch. Don't hesitate to contact me by email at lmc, that's L for Lisa, M for Mary, C for Clark, @teachanywhere.com. Thank you.